Sandy and Nora's podcast.
Hey, Nora.
Hey, Sandy.
Oh my gosh, guess what's happening right now where I am?
Is it an atmospheric river?
It is absolutely an atmospheric river. You might be able to hear it, listeners, and Nora, every once in a while you might be able to hear it. And listen, we always try to record with optimal sound situation. But unfortunately right now there's a very, very big storm that I'm right in the middle of. And not only is that very odd for LA, it's also increasingly not odd for LA. It's gosh, it's supposed to be this dry desert weather sort of Mediterranean place. But over the last few years, it's become more and more common to see not just rain and precipitation, but this kind of extreme weather pattern. And so, right now there's a state of emergency in Southern California and potential flooding from San Diego right up to past LA County. So, who knows? So if you hear some of that on the line, that's why. Apologies, I guess. It's not really my fault, so whatever. But, I feel sorrow for those of you who have to listen to it if it's kind of annoying and grating on the ears. But more importantly,
I know. As we record, the Maritimes and Newfoundland are getting pounded. Up to 150 centimeters is falling in Cape Breton and between 80 and 100 in other parts of Atlantic Canada. And I know that, there's no snow in Calgary and parts of Alberta right now. There's no snow in Toronto. Quebec City usually has a ton of snow. We have barely the amount of snow that would be normal. And I was just out today on at the St. Lawrence, and it's usually covered in ice right now. Today's the annual canoe races, where they literally run canoes across the ice, and then where the ice breaks, they paddle. And it seemed like it was more paddling than running today, which is not at all normal for the beginning of February on the St. Lawrence.
Yeah, I think that right now, in addition to Southern Ontario being under a state of emergency, Cape Breton is under a state of emergency. So all of this to say is that, the climate crisis is clearly impacting us with more extreme weather patterns year after year. And this is going to have, of course, long-lasting effects on everything from agriculture to our societies to economics to just the way that humans are able to live and who is able to survive these types of situations. And it's increasingly awful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but hey, don't worry. There's a lot of people who have gotten super rich off of these conditions.
Yeah, don't worry. You too can be one of those people. No, I'm just playing. But you know what? Besides this terribleness, I'm sure we have some folks to thank. Nora, do you got a list for me?
Yeah. Thank you so much to everybody who shared the episode, talked about the episode online, shared it especially on Instagram. I'm so bad at Instagram that I'm appreciative of everybody out there that helps us on Instagram. But especially this week, thanks to everybody who changed their donation or donated for the first time, especially Laura, Lindsay, Mark, Juno, and Anna. Thank you so much.
Nora, a lot happened this week. Again.
Oh my God. Could the news fucking relax?
I just feel like we have been caught in a constant state of never-ending crisis since 2020. And I was hoping that 2024 would be different. It's not. The news has been pretty terrible. So we've got lots to discuss. I mean, there's all of this news about international students. There's news from MLAs in British Columbia being complete pieces of shit. There's the intensification of warfare with the United States bombing Syria and Iraq and Yemen. And I mean, there's what's going on in Alberta. It feels like there's just so much. I don't even know if we can choose one to focus on. I think we just got to go with all of it.
Okay, well, why don't we start with the international student issue first? That seems like a place that we can ease into the other issues.
Sure. Let's start with international students. So if you haven't heard, Canada has decided to put a cap on international students coming into the country and studying at post-secondary institutions. Of course, this is all related to the news that I don't know how you could have avoided, that people have really tried to connect the amount of international students that are coming into Canada and the problems with the housing market. And so what the government is saying is that this is a measure to try to control that, and to pause, to put a moratorium on to cap international students coming into the country, and in BC in particular, a complete ban on new post-secondary institutions, new colleges and universities from enrolling international students at all.
Now, this is an issue where, like, I feel like nobody is actually talking about the real problems here.
Yeah.
Like, first of all, there's obviously the financing piece in universities and colleges, which people have talked about. But the way that it's been talked about is like, oh my God, if you stop international students from coming in, these universities and colleges can't afford to survive. And so therefore we need the international fees. It's like, that's one way to talk about it. Wrong. Don't do it that way. So, on one hand, it's like international students should not be paying the differential fees that they're paying. And there needs to be a huge fight to regularize their fees to be in line with Canadian students so that they are not relied on in this way. Obviously, policies need to be put into place to make that happen too. But like there has been like a really unbelievable increase in the number of international students studying in Canada. And it is not equal across the kinds of institutions. It's not the same. The increase has not been the same at, a University of Manitoba as it has been at a Confederation College, for example. And I think that that's a really important part of this because especially the Ontario colleges who've been more and more and more operating like private career colleges. This is where you see the impact of absolutely no planning whatsoever except money, 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 bring them in, money, 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 yeah. It is so stunning to me that not a single college administrator has been fired over this stuff. These people are not the most talented people in the industry, to say the least. And there's no question that this is bad management is not a strong enough way to explain what the problem is here, but it is colossally bad management, especially at the college level. Because if we start looking at other issues like how many visas are denied for students from countries in Africa or Pakistan or other countries that the Canadian government deems as being suspicious or enemy-like or whatever. I mean, there's a whole other problem where students are routinely refused visas to come with offers of admission to undergrad, master's, and PhD programs. So that's like a whole other issue. Then the third piece, which is almost completely lost, but is actually a huge part of this too, are the private career colleges, which shouldn't even be allowed to operate at all for anybody, for Canadian students, for international students. And when you organize a system completely in the service of buying and selling education, we fought so hard against these trends so long ago that it's stunning to see that nothing happened. Nothing happened. It's enraging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, it's so weird to, almost 20 years on, look back and see, we, at that time in the early aughties, we were like, this is going to become a crisis. And here we are in 2024. Guess what, Nora? We remain good at this. And just for those who haven't heard the arguments before, who haven't listened to our podcast and heard us argue this before, just don't know us and haven't heard us rant about this before, You may not know this, but in Canada, international students used to pay the same fees as domestic students. And it was in and around, past the late 1980s and through the 90s that neoliberalism's hold on post-secondary education really started to spread across the country. And not only did tuition fees start to increase massively so that it was not just a fee that folks could afford, often by just working in the summer to pay their tuition fees. They decided to introduce differential fees, and that specifically targeted fees for international students and fees for people in programs that are now deemed "quote unquote" professional fees. But there was nothing to that. It was just kind of this idea that, well, we'll decide that these programs, you can make more money in them in a career when you leave, and so we'll make differential fees. And with those differential fees, charge sometimes double, sometimes even triple tuition fees than folks who were in other types of programs deemed not professional were paying. And so as all of these fees were going up, colleges and universities weren't getting tons and tons more money into their coffers, because at the very same time, across the board, governments across Canada started to reduce their own contributions to public education. And so when Nora's saying earlier that the news is not talking about this correctly and saying that this cap will result in less money coming in, and that's going to be bad for the universities and colleges, the missing piece here is you're letting the provinces off the hook who have decided, and not based on any sort of democratic decision-making with the broader populations of each province, that they are going to divest from public education. And now this causes all sorts of massive issues, like the massive crises that we're seeing in healthcare can be traced back to how the provinces are no longer funding an affordable education or an accessible education for healthcare related careers. You can trace back not being able to resolve infrastructure issues across the country to these same types of decisions that these provinces are making. So it's not just an issue that you can just something that you can point to because the culture wars are trying to target immigration of all kinds and have settled on international students as the one that they're going to target today to say this is the issue with the housing market. This is a problem with long-term planning generally with provinces and a neoliberal approach to post-secondary education that hurts us all. Education is a public good, and from education, from that public good, flows so many more public goods. And what's happening right now to international students and how we're discussing international students, it's such a complicated issue, but suffice it to say that it is highly unjust to everyone the way that this is happening right now. And I mean the consequences. Did you see the story that was in the Queen's student newspaper that Queen's might be going bankrupt soon?
I mean, yeah, okay, great. Fuck you, Queens.
Yeah, I know. Right? Some of the ways that this happens, what ends up being discussed, there's so many issues in post-secondary education, including, what's going on at the executive level, the ballooning of the VPs and the provostial, class of people and institutions, and what that looks like, what that does to the overall amount of funds that are available to be spent. But I could go on and on.
Now, Sandy, I think I might be about to blow your mind.
Impossible.
And that's hard on this issue.
It is.
Okay, so, part of what's happening here, which is not at all being talked about, and this is literally blowing my mind as I'm searching, okay, what is the percentage change of international student enrollment versus domestic student enrollment, blah, blah, blah. And I have found a Statistics Canada report that pretty much demonstrates that higher education in Canada was a bubble, and that bubble has burst in the last 7 years. And so data from between 2010 to 2019 shows that year over year, enrollment among domestic students, especially domestic students aged 18 to 24, has plummeted in Canadian higher education institutions. At the same time, international students have increased. Why? Because the institutions are addicted to tuition fees and have to make up the gap of domestic students not enrolling. Did you know that?
I did not know that. And you know what? I'm kind of curious because I don't know what it looks like at the admissions level, like how they're making those decisions. Is that plummeting in some ways at all related to the fact that domestic students aren't getting in because they're making choices about where these students should come from? Like, or is it just that people aren't applying?
So this is aggregate data, so it's hard to say, and it's not necessarily about applications, though obviously that would be part of this. So this is going to be this is the total enrollment of students within higher education in Canada. And just to give you an idea, so enrollment starts dropping in 2010, and it drops by, looking at this scale, maybe 5,000 students, like across Canada. But then you get to 2013, 2014, and that number hits 75,000 fewer students in the system.
What?
2015, 2016, it's a little bit less. It's like 73.5 thousand fewer students. And then that number continues to be between minus 50 and minus 74,000 up until 2019. At the same time, international student enrollment is always positive and it's growing. I mean, the highest numbers it grows from 2018 to 2019, hitting not quite 50,000. So not actually fully replacing the domestic students who should have been there. And those numbers are students aged 18 to 24. So there is an influx of students who are older than 24, but the enrollment is still lower. And so I think, like, for me, that is the proof that this whole push to get people into higher education at all costs, mortgage your future, don't worry, you'll make it back, it's going to be an investment, blah, 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 blah. People know that it's bullshit, number one. And number two, if it's that demographic 18 to 24-year-olds that are not going on to higher education as quickly as then the numbers catch up a little bit, though, as I say, there's still fewer students, Canadian students in general, then like people can't afford it. Like they cannot afford to go to school. And so they are not going to school. And so then the international student presence becomes critical to fund places like Queen's, or as we all remember, Laurentian in Sudbury, Ontario, that also had a bankruptcy crisis many years ago. And by the way, university finances and budgeting is not actually that complicated. And these people are, again, like it's a question of talent and skill. Like I was on a board of governors where our university insisted that a third of the total budget was not spent every year and carried forward past the next year to encourage people to not run their budgets or whatever. Like these are institutions that have lots of money, except they can't manage it well. And they certainly have not been activist in managing their finances, considering how underfunding of the institutions has been ongoing for years now. Oh,
totally. And like Queen's has a healthy endowment. There were some things. Yeah. There were some things missing in the article that should have been there. So again, like as Nora says, like the story is bigger than it's being discussed, and I think one of my biggest takeaways for folks who are listening, who it would literally probably take us a series to talk about this issue with the sort of weighted consideration that it requires in order to understand it all. But just note that when you are reading stories about this, they're often woefully incomplete.
Oh, if only Canada Land could do it.
Oh, Nora. I didn't even mention this in like the list of things that happened this week, but
right.
Did you listen to Canada Land?
Do you know what?
Week?
Why don't you hold that thought? Hold that thought, because I just want to say one final thing about this, and it goes back to this whole racist framing of the affordability crisis. Because Chrystia Freeland, 3 hours ago from when we're recording, so Sunday night, just tweeted this, and I'll try to do it in her voice. Homes are for Canadians to live in and should not be used as a financial asset class by foreigners. We are using all possible tools to make housing more affordable across the country, including by extending the ban on foreign ownership of housing in Canada.
Homes are for Canadians to live in.
So, like, right there. Homes are for Canadians to live in. Sorry, Christia, are you going to actually stop the crisis of Canadians profiteering off of people's rents? Like, anyway, I just that it's just so exactly how the international student crisis is being reported as well. They're the reason we have no housing, unless it's foreign owners, and then they're the reason, and it's never us. It's never Canadians who are the actual reason, which we are. But yeah, so Canadaland. I mean, that was a bad week for that show.
Oh my goodness. Very, very. So I did not see all of the stuff on Twitter before I listened. I just listened to it on my own and was like, is this... So, you know what? Like, I don't want to talk about it too much, but listen, if you listen to Canadaland, this week there was just like one half of the show that was like unbelievably racist in a way that I just like I don't understand how they thought that it was okay to discuss what they were discussing in that way, and the other half of the show was, I don't know, trying to make the argument that artificial intelligence porn is freedom of speech if it is
robot freedom of speech.
I robot freedom of speech if someone's like sorry, there was no if to it. It was just like this stuff shouldn't be illegal, which is weird because anyway, regardless, I don't want to talk too much about Canadaland, but what is going on with this what was, until recently a really important source of media criticism in Canada. Like, I'm really confused. I'm wondering what it's like for the workers right now who are working there, and I'm just wondering what it's going to look like when the accountability that they talked about taking. The Canadaland Union put out a statement at some point last year after Jesse Brown made a number of comments that were ranging on unfair to Zionist, with remarks, with discussions about Palestine, Palestinian activists, and people who support Palestine, and journalists who support Palestine, and then a lot of silence on the journalists who have been harmed and killed by Israel. I mean, the Canadaland Union put out a statement saying that they would be working through some of the awfulness that has been happening over there, and be rebuilding public trust, and hoping that is going to happen, or it looks like Canada is in danger of losing one of its what was once an important place for media criticism. Yeah.
I also don't think there's much more to say about this other than this past week's episode of Shortcuts. I mean, the last week's episode of Canadaland was also really strange. And my heart goes out to Goldsby. He's in a weird spot. But that was a really weird episode to just talk about Twitter and being nostalgic about Twitter. But okay, fine. But Shortcuts was not just bad, but it was journalistic malpractice to an incredible extent. And I didn't listen to the AI porn segment, though Jesse Brown then comparing AI porn to Kent Monkman art was just like, it didn't make any sense, like racist and fucking weird. But the segment on the guy that shot up or tried to shoot up the Edmonton City Hall, which happened last week, and he went on a rant about all the things he hates about society, and he names everything from people being on their phones too much to immigration to wokeness to, literally everything. And he mentions Gaza, obviously, because it's a huge part of the news. And just because the guy says inshallah like 2 or 3 times, he's obviously Muslim. And he's obviously not okay. Like, he's obviously got some mental health problem because he's talking through a very clear problem and then goes and launches Molotov cocktails and shoots up a city hall. This becomes fodder for explaining how Palestinian activists are making these kinds of terror activities possible. And this is a line that B'nai B'rith was pushing, which is frankly nuts. And so Jesse using his show to launder a completely ridiculous fabrication on what is anti-Semitism, that this guy is first and foremost an anti-Semite. It's like he literally doesn't say anything other than like, you know, what we're doing in Gaza is horrible. Like basically that's the extent of what he says. The way that the far right reacted to this show online says to me that there is a real danger of this show becoming a completely fucking wackadoodle far right bunch of shit. Because there's money there. And when you've got someone leading something with no politics really, or Zionist politics maybe, or obviously, and chasing money to be able to sustain itself. Fuck, man. Like I don't know. I don't know how Canada Land comes back to this from this, because that was a real low. It was a real shocking low that causes actual real fucking damage. And you know, I don't know.
Yeah. So back to post-secondary education and the minister of post-secondary education in British Columbia. Yeah. So Selina Robinson, did you hear what she said this week? Did you hear what she had to say?
I did hear it. She was pretty sure that literally nothing existed in Palestine before Israel. Nothing at all. Oh, just a crappy bunch of land and no people, which then she corrected herself and said, maybe 700,000 people, but...
Not only that, she went on to say that, if I'm remembering the video correctly, that this was a place that didn't produce anything, that it wasn't a productive economy. And it's like, wow, it's really, here it is. Here is the justification that we have been saying exists behind so much of policymakers in the West, and how the West has been responding and responding to what's happening in Palestine, to Palestinians and pro-Palestinian activists, and how the West has been supporting Israel. You know, we are living in settler colonies, and settler colonizers support other settler colonizers. And to hear that was the justification, remains the justification for Canada's existence, for the United States' existence, this idea of terra nullius, that there was nothing on the land before, and that there was nothing productive about the land, and that in comes in civilization to make things better, to do what the people who were there before, who didn't exist, of course, weren't able to do. And what a disgusting comment that has been used to justify genocide over and over again, and of course is being used to justify genocide in this case.
But it's also, I mean, like it was just so mundane, you know, like she throws it out as if it's just like, yeah, like, you know, there was nothing there and now Israel's there and Israel's amazing, and what the fuck, what's everyone upset about, right? It just reminds me of how much techno-fascism is entwined in supporting the project of Israel. And so, you know, one of the higher profile things that happened in the aftermath of October 7th at Concordia University was that a group of students had set up a keffeya sale, and there was like more than 100 people lined up to buy a keffeya. And a student club on campus called Startup Nation put up a thing right beside the keffeya sale, which was broadly advertised, and Startup Nation did not advertise their thing. And they held a vigil for the people who are kidnapped, or at that time who were still kidnapped. I mean, people are still kidnapped, but it was, you know, pretty much 2 or 3 weeks after October 7th, right beside the keffeya sale. And after a couple of hours, things, you know, disintegrated and people started fighting with each other. And this group, Startup Nation, is a Zionist, explicitly Zionist organization that understands Israel as being the one and only true startup nation, a nation that is like a startup company that entered into the middle of nowhere, that just created, with all of these PhDs, created incredible technology, leading the world in weapons production and Teva sandals and I don't know, probably some other stuff that I'm not thinking of. And that's obviously what's underpinning such kind of like off the cuff remarks from Selina Robinson. Now, she has been consistently shitty, though, since October 7th in the things that she has been saying about Gaza. Her husband likes on Twitter, like some of the absolute most garbage fucking racist shit. But, you know, fine, she's not her husband. They obviously are together for a reason, but whatever. But she also interfered in the case of a professor at Langara College, Natalie Knight, to have her fired over comments that she made about October 7th. And so the Federation of Post-Secondary Educators came out in condemning this. CAUT came out condemning this. And it was super awesome to see an old comrade, Mike Conlon, on the news saying, what the fuck is this? And so here we have not only just like repugnant comments and what the fuck is wrong with this woman and her ignorance and her hatred and blah, blah, blah are all problems. But then she also does she does what should be done unto her right now, interfering inappropriately as a cabinet minister, as a minister of higher education, to get a college professor fired for comments that she personally disagrees with, comments that were not hate speech, that were not, you know, that she fully has the right to disagree with, but that the professor, Natalie Knight, has the full right to say.
In Selina Robinson's comments, she also mentioned that, you know, like if there were two nations warring, like the Squamish and the Tsleil-Waututh people over land, we would just stay out of it, would we comment? And like, what a fucking disingenuous comment for so many reasons. Some people have pointed out that she made the comment that, you know, normal people would stay out of it. So like, yes, like, weird that your brain thinks that Indigenous people are not normal and that other people are normal. But like, the other weird thing is that, come on, like Canada, like there is land dispute, like there is, what are you talking about? Like, how could you use that as a justification as though Canada is not implicated in the land, that Israel is claiming as its own, as though Canada is not implicated in the land in British Columbia, and how that land is governed either by the Canadian government, what land disputes currently exist, as though they could just be without some sort of understanding of Canada and its settler colonial, continued settler colonial machinations.
Yeah, like not to mention the British Columbia government has been super great in their relations with Indigenous people, and certainly Wet'suwet'en comes to mind. Also, so too does SERG, the Special Policing Integrated Unit that has been harassing and arresting land defenders. It's just like it. Anyway, the big question is, will she resign? Will she be forced to resign? Will David Eby force her to resign? We have this letter from Jagmeet Singh saying like he has expressed concerns or whatever, maybe stronger words and concerns to David Eby about this minister. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And I do think that it's possible to get her to resign. I think that this is something that people are fired up over, and that is kind of a pretty obvious thing for us who feel so powerless about the broader issues to be able to focus on something and say, well, at very least, maybe we should have fewer racist politicians. I don't know.
Okay, politicians, not just racist, also fucking trying to destroy the rights that transgender and genderqueer children have, or eliminate those rights, and to really start to stoke fucking discrimination against trans people in Alberta. And of course, I'm talking about Danielle Smith.
Yes, Danielle Smith, who is an idiot. I mean, let's be very fucking clear. And this attack on trans children and youth is abhorrent. Now, I think she's playing chicken with the federal government here, to have the federal government challenge the constitutionality of a law like this, because this is the most all-encompassing, the deepest and most significant attack on trans youth of any province. If and when the legislation passed, although it might not pass, people might be able to fight this and win. But I think that this is all about her constitutional wrangling with the federal government. Not to say that she's not also ragingly transphobic, but she wants this to be a culture war thing. And she sees her support as being critically buttressed by these culture war touch points, right? Let's remember that Danielle Smith was a failed leader of a provincial party. She was a disaster as the leader of the Wild Rose. People have, people on all sides of the political spectrum have been very skeptical of her capacity to actually be premier. She was on stage with Tucker Carlson and fucking Jordan Peterson and Conrad Black right before she announced this piece of shit legislation. So that's like cultural wars, massive flag there. And so like she needs everything possible to distract from the fact that the AHS is collapsing partly, but because of her direct actions, right? This is a woman that tried to order Tylenol from Turkey, and the Tylenol was too thick to use in IVs for infants and caused problems. And they were on the hook to buy something like 90%. They couldn't use 90% of the Tylenol that they bought under this ridiculous deal. Like she's so untalented that she has to buttress herself with this stuff because the NDP, Rachel Notley has announced that she's resigning. I've seen people calling for Naheed Nenshi to be drafted. That would pose a real threat to her because he's competent. And at the end of the day, I mean, it is just such an abhorrent and disgusting use of an already marginalized population, and in parts of the province where there aren't great supports for queer children. It will be devastating. It'll be devastating for queer children in larger cities as well, but especially in those rural communities where support networks might be much harder to access, or where parents have much more control over their children to see or not see different allies or ways of reaching out for help.
Yeah, I agree with you, though, that this is something that I think folks can win if there is enough pushback on the ground. And I'm seeing quite a bit of organizing happening. And medical associations have and medical associations pretty much immediately, including the Canadian Pediatric Society and the Alberta Medical Association, have called these measures, these proposed measures, really abhorrent, that they will harm children and they will harm their ability to do their jobs, to provide the care that their patients need. And so, remember when this was all about parental rights, or that's what we were told that it was about? What happened to that? Apparently, it's not actually about the rights of parents, which was already a really weird way to term all of this. It's not about the children's rights. It's actually about apparently what Danielle Smith wants and supporters of Danielle Smith wants. And they want to be able to make these decisions regardless of whether they are medically sound decisions, regardless of whether they are decisions that the children themselves want, or regardless of whether the parents want these decisions, which was apparently what this was all about in the first place. So go figure. What's really happening here is another fascistic government trying to get support from a base based off of hate and hatred of a particular group, and that's what's happening here, and that's how it should be discussed, and that's how we should understand it. And because of that, obviously this has to be opposed with everything that we've got, and I'm hopeful that this will not be able to pass. And like you said, she's experienced failures before. Let's keep going, Albertans.
That's right. No, exactly. And, when people come after children for any reason, it usually does backfire. Because, I know there's a video that went viral from a council meeting or a session, I don't know, in Medicine Hat, where someone stormed out of the room saying that he knew 2 people who've taken their lives because of homophobia and transphobia. People will not be able to stand that, but the organizing is going to be intense and it's going to be difficult. So you folks can win it. You'll win it. You'll win it. Especially because, the boss is an idiot, and that's super, super helpful because when they're super smart, it can be a little bit more difficult.
I mean, the final thing to mention tonight as we close out this episode is the intensification of U.S. activities in the Middle East and the bombing campaigns in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. You may have heard that last week 3 U.S. soldiers were killed. And so these latest attacks are the U.S.'s response. And all of it is related to, of course, making sure that Israel can continue to do what Israel is doing. And it's like, at what point does this stop? There's 30,000, just under 30,000 Palestinians are now confirmed killed by Israel. And there were attacks on Rafah City this week, which again, another place that Israel had said was going to be a safe place for people to take refuge. And it's just like what the fuck is going on with the way that the United States is responding? It's pretty horrible, and it just seems like a recipe for continued disaster.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, the attacks on Rafah are really demonstrative of Israel's genocidal intent here, because Rafah it's the south, it's a border city. Most people who want to leave would be in Rafah at this point, and they are waiting every single day to hear whether or not their names are called. I have friends. I have a friend with family there, direct family, wife and children. And that's what happens is every day, whether you're living in a tent or you're living 13 to a room in a friend's house because they're generous enough to let, as many people as possible to live there, people are hoping that their number comes up so they can escape from this horrifying situation. And, you can't say that that's anything but at best ethnic cleansing, like at best, right? Kicking people out of their country is ethnic cleansing. My partner made this comment and it kind of was like, oh, I didn't really notice that. But how completely warped reporting has become in how we talk about military actions. And when it has come to the Middle East, everything is like presumed to be tit for tat. Like, oh, yes, of course there would be retaliation to American soldiers being killed. Of course there would be retaliation to, Yemen shooting at or attacking or whatever merchant vessels within the Red Sea. Of course there's responses to these things. And it's like there actually doesn't need to be responses to this stuff unless we are cheerleading, ramping up the war, unless we're cheerleading on a massive regional and potentially larger than regional conflict. And to actually bring it back to Alberta for a minute, I don't know if you saw this headline in CTV, but this is wild to me. Quote, Trudeau minister says Alberta's trans policy proposal equal to NATO moment for LGBTQS plus community.
What?
NATO moment.
What does that mean?
NATO. I refused to discover what that means. And so, dear listener, you will have to Google that to find it out for yourself. Like, I don't know if they mean that, like, Manitoba is going to declare Article 5 on Alberta. And actually, like, Article 5 is when a member of NATO is invaded by probably Russia, which is, of course, what's underpinning the largest war games for NATO going on right now that Canada is participating in, right? We've sent 1,000 personnel over to this war games because they're simulating an Article 5 situation. Yeah, like that kind of language has crept in everywhere. And it's like somehow not completely bonkers that a federal minister was like, this is a NATO moment, because the drums of war are so encompassing and everywhere that we can't escape war language even.
Okay, well, as the thunder starts up again, that is truly something, Nora. Truly something.
Yeah. And, I just also want to mention, too, that we didn't talk about this before we started, but it's this really important piece of news for people to watch. Like Brandi Morin, who's a reporter for Ricochet and has been covering the encampments in Edmonton as the police have been breaking them up. She has been arrested for reporting, and Ricochet just reported that they've found evidence that she's also being very closely monitored by a shadowy kind of online company that is likely working for the province to basically stalk her words, her comments, and what she's reporting on. So, first of all, that has not become a big enough story in Canada. There has not been enough journalists talking about Brandi and what she's going through. But that aside, as globally violence continues to ramp up and we start to see even more and more and more of the inside of some of this stuff. So, there's a Telegram channel that IDF soldiers have been sharing smut videos of all the horrifying things that they've been doing to Palestinians. This has just broken this past week. There, like the New York Times, this whole story around the mass rapes on October 7th is completely fallen apart. It's just like, oh my God, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And that means the state is going to get more and more intense as they are policing what we are allowed to say. And whether it's related to Palestine and Gaza or whether it's related to land defenders and colonization in Canada, including as it relates to encampments and the mass homelessness problem that is plaguing our cities because we don't have any interest in giving people homes. It is going to get worse. It's going to get worse, and the surveillance is going to get more intense.